welcome to our webinar this morning. You're all very welcome. This is all about good governance for charity trustees, and I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Darwin, Director here at Thomas Coombs, is going to deliver this presentation to us this morning. Without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Christopher to take it from here.
Thank you very much, Jo. Good morning, everybody. Yes, my name's Christopher Darwin, and I'm a director at Thomas Coombs and head the charity and not-for-profit department at the firm. I've worked with charities for 30 years now. My first charity assignment was a museum back in 1992. At present, we represent around 50 charities and not-for-profit organisations. And the important thing of that is it's a very wide spread of organisations, and we've picked up a lot of experience in different scenarios and experiences. So we're able to assist trustees in various circumstances. Now, the purpose of the seminar today is to look at governance, and the main areas of focus will be around trustees, delving into their role and who can be trustees and the governance and so on around trustees. We're also looking at conflicts of interest, public benefit, reporting to the outside world, and also the risks and the management of risks in this very uncertain world. So, to get started, just thinking about the importance of trustees. All charities need to have clear objectives and goals. To be an effective charity, always need to be looking to improve efficiencies and looking at new ways of delivering the activities and the purpose of the charity. To do that, the charity needs to have resources to deliver good cause they're working towards, and very importantly, controls to make sure those resources are used in an effective way and achieve the full potential of what the organisation can do in terms of delivering that charitable purpose. So very central to this control, or another term, governance, are the charity trustees. And that's really why we're focusing on this today. Now, in terms of the role of trustees, we've got various things to manage and consider. And on the slide we're presenting at the moment, we just listed the 4 areas, key areas, in terms of the trustees are responsible for managing the long-term direction of the charity, towards the objectives and purpose the charity has been established for, implementing the policies and activities to actually achieve those objectives. Along the way of achieving those objectives, you need to ensure compliance with legal requirements. That might be company law, it might be human resources aspects and so on. But there's also the accountability and actually reporting back and showing the activities of the charity to various stakeholders who have an interest in the charity. Now, when you look at all those areas, that's a lot of responsibility. And the trustees can be judged on various aspects. It might be managing the finances, it might be how the service users are looked after, it might be getting the best staffing in the roles to actually deliver the service. Good controls and governance will help achieve all those areas and result in good results for the charity. But vice versa, a lack of control can lead to failures and problems. So the trustees need to ensure that controls are there and the governance is good. And an important area there is having the support of various people, to help to ensure the right things are done. So that might be appointing a good chief executive, but it's also having the right advisors around, such as accountants to give advice in certain areas. So, who can be a trustee? So a lot of responsible decisions to be made. There are actually some rules around who can actually be a trustee of a charity. And on the slide, we've listed a few of the key areas. They've got to be older than 16. And very importantly, they need to be appointed in accordance with any restrictions within the governing document. And we'll chat later about the governance, constitution of the charities. They also need to be a fit and proper person. And essentially that's a way of saying, somebody who will ensure the charity's funds are spent and utilised for the charitable purpose the charity is being set up for. Now, the final one there is that they're not disqualified from being a trustee. And down the right-hand side, we've listed some of the examples of those disqualifications. So that's bankruptcy, unspent convictions, and things like the sex offenders register. So all important areas. A way the trustees can make sure new trustees are qualifying as such, that they meet all these criteria, is to have a fit and proper declaration form. And there's various examples on the internet, and we can supply standard declarations in that area. And it just helps ensure you've documented that whoever you appoint as trustees are valid trustees. One aspect which is not on this slide is, beyond these basics, what actually makes a good trustee is somebody who's committed to the cause of the charity, and importantly, willing to learn how to be an effective trustee. And probably a major area of that is actually listening to other trustees and picking up advice and the best practice from them, as well as listening to advisors as well. Now, on this screen, I mentioned the governing document, and I'll just delve into that for a moment. It's very important to the overall governance of a charity. And each organisation will have a governing document. Now, this can vary between the entities of the charity, because it might be a constitution of a CIO, it might be the trustee of an unincorporated charitable trust, or it might be the Articles of Association for a company limited by guarantee. But all those documents will cover the key areas which are mentioned on this slide, in terms of who can appoint new trustees, when and how new trustees are appointed, who can be a trustee. There might be criteria about the nature of a trustee, and also in terms of the ongoing governance, how long those appointments can last, and whether a trustee can be reappointed after the end of that term. And where a trustee wants to cease their involvement with the charity, what the rules are about resigning or actually being removed as a trustee. Now, very important areas, and these things sit in the background, and it's only when something happens that you realise how important these documents are. So we would recommend that whatever governing document a charity is using, they are reviewed on a regular basis, and we work in association with solicitors who specialise in the charity sector, who can actually review these documents and make sure they are up to spec and good for purpose. Now, just coming back to the responsibilities of trustees, we touched on that earlier about how responsible being a trustee is. There are various legal obligations around being a trustee and what you're responsible for. And when you start looking at these obligations, you get quite specific in terms of ensuring the charity meets its public benefit, what a charity has been set up for, its good cause. Also, the trustees are required to comply with the governing document and the law. Trustees are also required to act in the best interest of the charity, and we'll delve into this area a little bit later in terms of conflicts of interest which can arise in that situation. Managing the charity's resources and looking after those funds and ensuring they spent on the good purpose the charity is set up for, and very much tied in with that best interest aspect, actually acting with reasonable care and skill and not being reckless in the decisions which are made. And then finally, ensuring the charitable organisation is accountable to the outside world. And an element of that is the financial reporting each year and other disclosures to stakeholders. Now, failure to do this can cause problems for the charity and for the individuals involved. It can open up to the charity failing, and in extreme cases, the trustees becoming liable for some of the actions personally. Now, so we've covered in this first section various aspects of the trustees and why they're important to the operations of a charity and its governance. Just want to delve into a specific area now in terms of conflicts of interest. Now, as a bit of background, one of the Charity Commission's role, and the Charity Commission sits there in the background, governing and overseeing the charitable sector. One of its roles is to ensure trustees comply with various responsibilities, and that's things such as acting in the interest of the charity, operating in a manner that's consistent with charitable purpose, again, as mentioned previously, acting with due care and consideration and diligence, and complying with the various legislations. Now, some of the problems which can emerge in where things are not in the best interest of the charity is a conflict of interest which stops people making the best decisions for the charity. And where that can happen, it can make those decisions invalid. It can open the charity up for being challenged. And in extreme cases, the adverse publicity which can come along with some of these conflicts of interest. Now, Charity Commission actually defines what a conflict of interest is, and essentially what we're saying is where an individual is putting their own interests and loyalties, either actually or just being seen to have those interests and loyalties, which prevent that individual making the right decision for the best interests of the charity. And I've given here a few examples of situations which can lead to a conflict of interest, and these are real kind of danger areas. It's where an individual who is a trustee is receiving payment, from the charity for maybe some goods it's sold to a charity or service provided, or even being an employee. It can create a conflict in terms of the decision making. Another dangerous area is making a loan to a charity, with personal interest coming to the decision making. It might be they're not actually engaging in a contract or an arrangement individually, but they might own a business which is actually providing services or goods and entering into a contract. Again, it could be seen that the decision taken could be biased towards the interest of that individual. Other situations can happen where individuals using the charity services may be undervalued. It's a dangerous area for an individual to be involved in decision making. And it can be any other type of financial transaction. I've got to say, quite a typical one we come across is in our grant making trust clients, such as health charities where we're giving donations for cancer research type activities, and an organisation, maybe an institution, university, or hospital benefiting from those grants. They might have a representative as a trustee on the board, so there's that conflict of interest which can arise in that an organisation we're involved in is benefiting from that grant, and to the outside world there might be a perception of bias, and whether it's clear what the best interest of the charity was in making that grant. So they arise, and that, as I say at the end here, it's not uncommon for conflicts of interest to happen. By its very nature, the people who become trustees of charities have an interest in that charity, and could be quite closely involved in that area or sector they're operating in. So the fact that conflicts of interest exist is not a problem itself, but it's how the charity handles it, which is the key to it. And on this next slide, just showing how charities should actually handle the situation. And if successfully dealt with, the charity can make the right decisions, can be seen to be making the right decisions, and move on to look after other areas. So the key areas for handling this conflict is to have a written record. So if it is ever challenged, you can pull out the notes and explain to somebody or an individual or governing body how the situation was dealt with, and how the situation was tracked during the event. And the type of things to include in that is the nature of the situation, whether it was that particular contract or grant and so on, and which trustees are involved, and where conflicts of interest have been declared in advance. It's quite typical at the beginning of a trustees meeting for any affected trustees to declare their interest in anything on the agenda and consideration of certain contracts. An outline of the discussion, that could be the board meeting minutes. And when anybody withdrew from the meeting where things were being discussed, and again, that's quite typical in these situations for an affected trustee to actually not take part in the decision process, but actually remove themselves from the room. So other trustees are not intimidated or influenced by the presence in the room of the things they chat about in terms of this actual situation. And then finally, just an overview of how trustees took the decision, the votes and considerations around that. Now, an interesting aspect about conflicts of interest is they do usually arise around trustees or their family connections. And the financial reporting standards actually cover these situations. So it's very common for these situations to actually end up being disclosed in the financial statements for the annual accounts. I think this, I mentioned I worked at Thomas Coombs for 30 years, and I think this has been an issue for those 30 years at a very high profile. And I think the first big major news article on this was Robert Maxwell, when he was a pension trustee, and how the funds of that the Mirror group, newspaper group, was dealt with, and conflicts which arose around making loans and things. And ever since that, the standards governing reporting to the outside world through the annual accounts have had certain procedures and disclosures in place to cover what they call related party transactions. So if, for example, a grant is awarded to a university where somebody in that department is a trustee of the charity, that will be disclosed in the accounts and the situation. Other examples might be one of the trustees might own the property and the charity rents it, and there'll be disclosures about how that's come about, whether it's a market rate, what's getting charged, and the length of the lease and the relationship the trustee has with that property. All these types of things would get disclosed in the account, so stakeholders can actually see what happens. So given there's a publicity around it, actually recording the decisions around these conflicts of interest are very important. These things are going to be in the outside world, and the accounts are deposited with the Charity Commission, and the Charity Commission does have a role at inspecting charities and could well pick up on these items and raise questions with the charity itself about how certain things were handled. So a very important area for the trustees to consider. Now, I mentioned other areas we would touch on. We've looked at trustees, we looked at conflict of interest. Public benefit. That's another important area of good governance and the role trustees have, because organisations are awarded charitable status, and as a result, they get tax exemptions, they get special rates of VAT in certain circumstances, and they get exemptions from certain things such as rates and so on. But that charitable status can only be provided where the organisation is providing public benefit. And when the charity registers, it will say what its public benefit is. But it's very important that trustees ensure that continues to be the case, and they operate the charity within the remit of that charity registration and the public benefits which were defined in its constitution and registration with the Charity Commission. And on the screen, we've listed the main areas where a public benefit exists, and so a charity can be registered. And they're quite wide ranging. It covers areas of community, poverty, sports, the environment, and animal welfare, young, aged, disabled individuals, support of the police and armed services and such like. Also the advancement of education, advancement of religion, assisting in health. I mentioned we have a number of charities which provide grants for health research and so on. Advancing the arts and heritage and such like. And then, that's quite wide ranging, but society changes. So, if there's anything else which is in the spirit of those headings, for helping the public. So this is probably the most key area of all the things I'm covering today in terms of what a trustee needs to ensure public benefit. And the importance of that is, again, emphasised by the Charity Commission and requirements they request, such like in the trustees report, the annual statement, which is the narrative which goes with the annual accounts pack. There's a requirement to include a statement that the charity does provide public benefit, and a bit of explanation around what public benefit is. And actually the trustees have taken notice of the guidance provided by the Charity Commission in this area. They do issue a special document which trustees can look at. Just on a little side, in terms of the documents the Charity Commission do provide, one of the actions of the Charity Commission has been to make self-help and self-provision very important for the charity trustees in terms of providing lots of resources on their website, where if you're not sure about a certain area, you can search the Charity Commission website, and they have a vast array of guidance. So not just on public benefit, but it might be around risks, it might be various things, it even gets quite detailed in terms of running a village hall. It's a lot of what we call CC publications, a vast array of resources to help trustees. And public benefit is just one of those. Now, I mentioned the annual accounts. An important role mentioned earlier was feeding back to stakeholders of the charity in terms of what's happening and holding themselves accountable to those stakeholders. Part of the formality around that is the Charity Commission requires all registered charities to annually submit various bits of information. And that is graded. For a very small charity, there's probably not that much really needs to be put on public record, whereas for a very large national charity, the requirements are more detailed. And they've included some of the bandings there. So up to £10,000 of income, and income is a very important guide in these areas. There's certain limited amounts of annual return information which it requires to be submitted. And an important area of that is actually who the trustees are. Then, as the charity gets larger, there's a bit more information which needs to be filed, such as it's above £10,000, a more detailed annual return, and above 25,000 income, not only the annual return, but the annual accounts of the organisation need to be published. Failure to submit these accounts and the annual return can result in problems for trustees, and it's a criminal offence, very much regarded as mismanagement and misconduct of the trustees, not to provide this information on public record. Now, this is a very important area where Thomas Coombs and other accountants can help. We can assist charities actually prepare their annual accounts and give guidance on the contents of their annual report, and so they can feed back to the stakeholders. Another important area is, as charities get larger, and especially above £1 million of annual income, a statutory audit is required of those financial statements. Thomas Coombs, as a registered auditor, can actually provide that level of scrutiny where the actual books and records and those accounts are audited. And some charities actually have a voluntary audit, even when they're below that threshold, just to give more credibility to the stakeholders in terms of this scrutiny and how the funds of the charity are being looked after and expended towards that good cause. Some of our smaller charities also have the independent examination, which is a lighter touch of security, but it still shows that third parties been looking over the records. So that's very much where a firm of accountants can assist the trustees with their responsibilities. Now, the final area I'd like to cover this morning is in terms of risks. What can you say about the world we live in now? It is just very uncertain and risky. We've just come out of an unusual period of COVID with all the uncertainty that's generated, and then we've just gone plumped ourselves into the Ukrainian crisis and all the uncertainty that's created. And I think that's just a sign of the world we're in. It's just things are uncertain or risky in another context. Now, if the trustees don't take account of that risky world we're all in, bad decisions can be made for the charity and the trustees alike, leaving the charity vulnerable and not able to fulfil its main purpose. And in an extreme case, leave the trustees liable for the problems of being engaged in. So, what's recommended, and the Charter Commission is very encouraging of this and puts various requirements in place, is that the trustees consider the risks the charity faces and have a process for managing those risks. Now, that risk management process, which again is something at Thomas Coombs we can help guide a charity and its trustees through, first requires the trustees to look at various areas where problems and riskiness might exist for the charity and could have significant impacts for the charity. And just give you an example of some of these areas, it could be around the objectives of the charity. It might be around how the governance and how the charity is established. It could be about the laws and regulation, compliance environment the charity operates in, which can come with lots of problems and possible breaches. It could be external factors, how the political world or demographics affect the charity. It could be operational issues, a certain type of charitable work could be quite involved, and the process around delivering that service or goods can be quite involved, so operational aspects. It could be human resources areas where staff are engaged, and that comes with a whole multitude of issues of employment law. It could be environmental and planning needed for the activities which are needed, or it might be contamination of the site or something which related to the activities of the charity. These areas, it's quite wide. It could be technology, how things are adapted in charity or not. And it could even be financial, are financial controls in place? Is there enough resources to deliver the service, financially? Could be areas of taxation, VAT legislation, gift aid. All these areas are quite complex and could have risks to the charity. It could be fundraising, it could be the uncertainty of it, how long the contracts the charity got for fundraising are. Is it looking for one-off donations, or is it repeats, and so on? And all the risks that income stream can attach to the charity. And finally, it could be fraud, how exposed is the charity to fraud? So I've listed quite a lot of areas, and it just highlights how wide-ranging the risks faced by charity are. So the trustees should look at those areas. And then there's various ways of actually documenting and tackling this. An impact and likelihood model is quite common, where for all these factors which have been identified relevant to a charity, the impact of those items are assessed. Are some quite critical, or the extreme case are quite minor. And then the likelihood and probability of these happening, could it happen quite often, or is it very remote? Is it kind of once in 1,000 years, situation? And from that matrix, where high risk, high impact areas get high marks, and very probable areas get the high marks, and get a matrix. You can concentrate on those areas of high probability and high impact, and put a mitigation plan in place. What factors are you doing? What procedures to actually reduce the impact on the charity? And then finally, all that process of the issues, the actual risks, and the mitigation can be documented in the risk register. I think the final thing I will say about that risk register, the Charity Commission encouraged disclosures around the areas of risks and the mitigation procedures are put in place by the trustee, actually disclosing the trustees report. And it's an area we've very much helped with as part of the finalisation of the accounts and chatting about the trustees report, that wording's in place. Okay, so I've been chatting for, just looking at the clock, about 35 minutes. Thank you for taking part in this seminar and listening to the various areas I've covered. Has anybody got any questions? Joe, I think you've been monitoring this while I've been chatting.
I have. We've got a couple of questions, and we've got time for a couple here, Christopher, so I'll just run these past you. A question here about the Charity Commission, and do they actually take action over these governance matters?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because I mentioned in the presentation about the role the Charity Commission's got, and what sanctions it could possibly take against individuals. Things go wrong, but do they? You read various reports about a reduction in staffing at the Charity Commission, and you start to wonder whether they actually do take action. But one of the things we've noticed at Thomas Coombs in terms of Charity Commission, they've moved more towards self-help for charities. So the resources are there, but beefed up the compliance side and scrutiny and actually inspecting charities. And just last week, I saw an article about a charity which had been struck off and closed down. And that was the Capricorn Animal Rescue Charity. And there's lots of publicity about that in terms of what the Charity Commission have done. and it banned one of the trustees for 15 years from being a charity trustee. And Miss Stewart had been found to be basically doing some of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of conflicts of interest. I think she was occupying one of the properties at undervalue. She was making payments to family members, and I think cash was getting diverted from the charity shop. So all the things, those conflicts of interest I mentioned earlier, they are real, and the Charity Commission do take action. Okay.
Fine, but yeah, thank you. We've got time for one more question, which I've got here, which is regard to governance, what policies should be included in the trustees report?
Yes, I touched on that earlier in terms of certain aspects need to be in the trustees report. Just to remind people, the trustees report is a narrative section to the front of the annual report. So you get the numbers at the back, but then at the front you get a narrative description. All meant to tell the same story in terms of numbers tell the financial performance, but that performance and activities gets a narrative interpretation. Very much a shop window for the charity to explain the good causes it's supporting and its activities. But it's also a very important arena for disclosure of certain policies the charities are engaging in. There's a standard section on structure and governance. So the bits I mentioned about governing document and the rules around the appointment of trustees and policies there, they should all be disclosed in the trustees report. The risk management, the final bit I was chatting about, should also be disclosed in the trustees report in terms of what risks the charities face and the mitigations it's engaging and the overall view of the trustees in that area. Public benefit and policy towards ensuring compliance with that are very important to be included in the trustees report. As well as policies in terms of financial management, such as reserves policy, which is where trustees decide how much money to put to one side for a rainy day effectively. And it's part of the risk management to some extent, making sure you've got enough resources to withstand fluctuations. So key disclosure of that policy and whether they think we've got too much or too little money and the actions you need to take. And the more recent disclosure which been encouraged is around fundraising. And a statement around the ethical approach to fundraising in terms of how it's done, in terms of door-to-door collections and public collections, what complaints they've had and what their policies are around such areas. So all very important policies to include in the trustees report. It's an area we can run through when we're looking at the annual accounts and trustees report. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Christopher. Okay, well, that brings us up to our 40 minutes. Thanks very much for your presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this, so we'll make a copy available on our website later on today. Just remains for me to say thank you for attending, and I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. We look forward to our next one.
Thank you very much.